There is an ever-present duality in everything, including in love. Dr. Eric Meljac, Assistant Professor of English and Director of Creative Writing at WT, has studied the phenomenon of death in literature, but equally important is the study of love.
The idea of love is it's simply part of the human condition. We are built as robots to do two things: love and die. And I'm going to tell you why I say love and die. Um, so I studied how to write poetry when I was in college and grad school, and my professor George Bilgier, who will be on campus next in November, he'll be coming to November to do a reading. But one of the first things he told us the first day of our poetry writing class is that poetry is about two things and only two things: love and death. Those are the two grand, gigantic subjects that poetry is about. And you can extend that to all literature, that all literature is in some way about one of those two things. And usually they're combined. Usually it's the combination of the two that makes a novel. Let's think of a couple of great examples, and we'll go to the biggie. We'll go to Willie Shakespeare. How about that? I'm not the Shakespearean, but I've read it. I've read them all. But I was thinking this morning about our interview, and I was thinking, what are in my mind, the two greatest plays about love that Shakespeare wrote? And the first one that comes to mind, obviously, is Romeo and Juliet. I mean, how can you not talk about love in literature without mentioning Romeo and Juliet? And what's really interesting in Romeo and Juliet is that they're willing to die for one another. Um, they're willing to sacrifice their lives for love. Now, of course, Juliet takes a potion that makes her look dead, and Romeo kills himself because he thinks Juliet is dead. And then when Juliet awakens and sees Romeo dead, she kills herself. That's a it's a tragedy. Obviously, it's the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. It's called that, but it starts with the idea of star-crossed lovers, that they were already cursed because they were in love. And I think that really is an interesting concept, that love can be a kind of a curse. And I think that that's a really interesting idea to explore, that love can be a curse, that it can be that star-crossedness. I mean, remember, Romeo and Juliet come from warring families, right? And the families don't like one another, and there's a sword fight in the play because the families aren't getting along, and um, their destiny is to die for one another. And I think that is a really interesting way to look at things. What would interest me is why they are so in love that they're willing to die over this love, right? And they're only teenagers. I mean, they're 15, 16 years old probably, so but they're willing to die for one another in a way that is really telling about how strong a love drive can be in an individual, right? They're so in love, they're so madly in love that they're willing to cease to exist because they can't have one another. And that's really compelling. And when I was thinking about that earlier, the second play, this is going to sound weird, the second play I thought of was Hamlet. There's a lot of love in Hamlet. The reason Hamlet's so sad is because his father was murdered and he loved his father. He loved his father so much that he didn't like that his uncle was going to marry his mother. The reason that bothered him a lot was because he loved his mother so much. And there's been a lot of discussion over the many, 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 many years that there's incestuous love there, that the love is almost incestuous. But he loves his mother so much that he's moved by this love, this familial love, this family love, that it throws him into absolute chaos in his mind, right? And we don't really quite know, is Hamlet really suffering from a mental crisis, or is he play acting to try to seek revenge, right? But he has a love too, and her name is Ophelia, and she watches Hamlet go mad, And as Hamlet descends and begins to reject Ophelia, like Romeo and Juliet, she commits suicide. And Hamlet throws himself in her grave, and he's crushed even further. So his all of his love is love of loss, losing his father, going to lose his mother, so more or less losing Ophelia, losing his friends. And so I think Hamlet is really built on this, on the same principle, that love is something that moves us so much that we're willing to sacrifice something as precious as life for it. And you see this, kind of, I call it the love death drive. I'll make up a term there. This love death drive in a lot of literature, this idea that I'll go as far as to cause death, because I love you so much. And in a kind of a backwards notion, in Toni Morrison's Beloved, Setha, the mother of Beloved, who Beloved is a ghost, right? But Beloved is really the name of a baby. And Setha murders her child Beloved to keep her child out of slavery, because the slave catchers were coming. And she knew that if Beloved, the baby, were captured, the baby would be sold off into slavery. And she loved Beloved so much that she murdered Beloved. Okay, and was put in jail for it, but she murdered Beloved because she didn't want to see her have the same fate that her mother had, which was being sold into slavery. You love something so much that you kill it to save it from a life where it would suffer its entire life. You see love and death linked in literature all over the place. And it's kind of just always there. It's not, I wouldn't say every single story about love has that death drive in it, but in narratives, you see it a lot. You see this idea that, I'm willing to die for you, or I'm willing to risk that boundary between life and death for you. And I think that's really interesting, and a really interesting avenue to explore is that idea that love can be so intense that the signal of death, comes over, right? And it's and I think a lot of it goes back to Judeo-Christian mythology. You could simply say, Christ loved us so much that he was willing to die on the cross for us. In many religions, the prophet was so willing to save his or her people that they were willing to die for their people. But then there's just you're just so enamored that, the Cavalier poets, one poem, gather ye rosebuds while ye may, saying, we only have a short life. I guess that's a little death, but we only have a short life. Let's fall in love right now. Let's just love while we got the time to love. Let's just do it. Let's just fall in love. And I think, there's something to be said about that. And literature has always kind of had that propensity, Shakespeare's love sonnets, right? The idea that we're going to grow old one day, and eventually after that, we don't know, but while we're alive, let's spend our lives loving one another. And I'll draw that out to a universal, to the Beatles, all you need is love, right? I think song lyrics count as literature, so all you need is love. John Lennon's big pronouncement through his whole 40 years of existence was that, we should just love. We should just love, and I don't know, regardless of how you feel about John Lennon and his life, his idea was that, we could end war if we just loved. We could end poverty if we just loved. If we could just do this thing, and I think that goes back to the literary traditions. Is that while we've got the time, let's love. Let's not hate. Let's not just dislike each other for the color of our skin, or from what country we're from, or what religion we practice, or whether we like cats or we like dogs. There's no reason to worry about these things. If we just loved one another, then these things wouldn't matter that separate us. And I think literature really does that. Even in Beloved, killing the baby, as a love act, is loving while I can and how I can, the best I can. I guess. This is not the best example, but while I can love you, let me love you this way. And unfortunately, for a slavery situation, it would be that. But in the moments we have, let's love one another the way and do the best thing we can for one another. Of all people, of all types, of all across the spectrum, let's just love.
This has been Hannah Valencia and Victoria Fatirigan for the Prairie News.